could have told me my hair looks like.
Your hair looks great.
Oh man, it's a shit show.
Like absolute silliness. I had a cowlick sticking straight up.
I believe we should be live.
Let me refresh. Oh, you got an ad.
Ads?
Ads.
Sounds about right. Sounds like YouTube. All right.
Bitch, I am EDH Rec and I still get ads. Me. Get my lighting fixed. Look like an adult here.
I find it funny how we get ads for like things that we advertise. Like I don't know if that's you guys, but like when we get a sponsor, I'll
selling us to us.
It's funny. It's just like, oh, we just got a sponsorship with Huel. That's really fun. And so I'll collect images for that. And then immediately the rest of like the internet is like, oh wait, you researched the word Huel that one time, therefore.
I had tried Huel like years ago and I was like, this is good enough. But then like they redid it and we got sponsored. They're like, oh, brands that I know and recognize.
Yeah. Okay.
What's going on, everybody?
I'm seeing some chat roll in. Joey's a bit quiet for me. Thank you. You beat me right to it. I was about to ask how volume levels are. Desktop audio, microphone audio. I'm gonna tweak mine just a little bit. Definitely let me know if anything audio-wise sounds a little bit off or anything like that. We're obviously gonna give a little bit of time for people to still filter in because the Wizards of the Coast stream just ended, and we want to just sort of chill for a moment. You know, we don't go live very often, so if people see us, want to give some time.
Yes. Aside from the OnlyFans stream, this is really the first time we.
Data.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's no. That.
Nope. Those are the other gifts that were ungiven.
Right.
Wait.
I should say ungiven.
People pay to not have to see it.
I see someone saying Dana with all the water. Joshua Hell there. Dana, do you have the?
I do, in fact, have the giant water jug.
You just need to evolve that as a bit on the show. Like next time it's a gallon of milk, and they just got a full tankard and just.
I did years ago. I did a show. The guy did a movie podcast, and people always brought a drink on the show, and I made a giant like fishbowl kind of like drink with. I used blue Gatorade. It wasn't actually alcohol, but like I had blue Gatorade in it, like whipped cream and like 6 different like candy sticks sticking out of like the most ridiculous fishbowl drink you could possibly ever get.
All right, I haven't seen any other notes about volume levels or anything, so I think that's probably okay. But again, correct me if that's if anything sounds a little bit silly or a little bit off or anything like that. Hope that everyone's doing good. Are people just here from the Wizards of the Coast live stream?
Yeah, that just wrapped up like minutes ago.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Matt, you had it on the whole time. I only got to catch pieces of it, but obviously I saw the article and, of course, Gavin's video as well. So
yeah, the stream was really good, and so just as a background too, like Gavin mentioned a few times, like they were digging into our data, working with Architect. It was really fun and interesting from my end. So like I got to talk to Gavin a couple weeks ago, just like making sure that all of the stuff for Architect, all the stuff for EDH Rec was ready to go live. But I didn't know the final list. Like he's like, okay, what do you think of like some of these cards? I was like, this one doesn't make sense. Like this wasn't it. But it was interesting to see that. And then for the final list that we we're working on to update, it's really cool. I'm glad that a lot of this is done because there's a lot of clarity. There's a lot. I mean, it's a big announcement. I mean, it's probably the second biggest announcement in the past couple years for Commander. Second only to the original announcement that we got.
Right. Yeah, this has been a productive year in terms of big Commander changes.
Yeah, and like 5 unbans is
and insane.
Yeah,
there's a lot going on. I'm glad that they did a lot of administrative stuff like this, and I'm glad they gave us so much clarity. That was one thing. So when we were in Chicago at MHCon Chicago, we got a chance to sit down and talk with Gavin. And my biggest quibble, and I'm really glad because it makes me feel very smart, is they did a lot of clarity around like the intent of all of the brackets and everything too. That was my biggest fault, is because there's yes, there's no way to prevent all the bad actors. There's still going to be gamification, but just making sure people know, like, yes, technically this falls under the rules to be a bracket 2 deck, but you built it to be a bracket 4 deck, and so you're kind of lying to everyone, including yourself, if you like sit down and say this is a bracket 2 deck.
Yeah. Yeah, I there's actually there was a line somewhere in the article where Gavin explains, I think it was in the beta update article. It's somewhere in here where he specifically states, if you're doing XYZ, you're being a bad actor. And I was kind of like, go off, Gavin. Like, just,
you really are.
It might be somewhere around here. Here. Then you are being a bad actor. I was just like, I low key love that. Not dad telling people off. Like, it's so.
Yeah, you're never gonna prevent everyone from gamifying the system. You can make it more difficult, but the thing I really liked about the clarifications is it just makes it easier for people who are trying to honestly like play within the confines of the brackets to do it correctly, or to do it in an accurate way. I think the more information, the more clarity we have, the better it is for people who are trying to, be good actors with it. And I think the explanation, I think, does a good job of that.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, let's get into like the actual announcement then, because it's more than just the cards themselves and more than just the clarity. So like there's a lot going on in this announcement.
Yeah. I mean, biggest one that I assume a lot of people are reacting to right now is the 5 unbans, which are of course being added to the Game Changers list, but Gifts Ungiven, Sway of the Stars, Braids, Coalition Victory, and Panoptic Mirror all getting unbanned and moved on to the Game Changers list. And then they added, I think it was 18 other cards to the Game Changers list as well. So major Game Changer list expansion, a couple of cards being unbanned, and there were 2 cards that were removed from the Game Changers description as well. So, guys, where should we start with all that? Those are like 3 big things.
I think the unbans make sense.
Yeah, we're here already. It's already on screen.
This on screen. Yeah, there we go. So chat, we definitely want to hear like your reactions to this, because this isn't just us reacting, it's also like seeing what the tone is. The immediate impression that I saw online was people being kind of like, oh, all right, work. But I don't know if that's the way that you two felt. I don't know, chat, if that's the way that you feel.
So we talked about this when we did the show, right after the first bracket thing came out, what cards could be possibly unbanned. Mm-hmm. I think this applies to basically almost every card that could potentially be unbanned. There's a game that happens here with all of these cards. I don't like any of these cards. I don't think any of them make games better.
Sure.
But if you have your 5-color deck and you're like, oh, I want to add a Coalition Victory to it, I don't think that's going to make for a better experience. But you're going to have to take out something that's also altering.
Sure.
If you're putting in Coalition Victory in bracket 3 particularly, which is where I tend to live, you're taking out Rhystic Study, or you're taking out Demonic Tutor, or you're taking out Smothering Tithe. Right. Something very, very impactful has to come out to make room for that. So while I don't like Coalition Victory and don't necessarily want to see it show up in a game, well, I don't love seeing Rhystic Study either, or so like there's a lot of push and pull, and I think that amount of push and pull makes it's way less impactful to see these cards show up in decks.
Yeah, I think having Game Changers, it's kind of a perfect place for these to live. And we've said this like on all of our content that we've been doing about all the Game Changers, is these things where you're only going to see them where you like are expecting to play at that power level already. I think is kind of a perfect place for stuff like Coalition Victory, which like before the bracket system existed, I would have told you are nuts if you want to unban that and just like
agreed.
All and the bracket system with all of these is that perfect place for these to exist. I don't ever want to play against the Braids, same way I don't ever want to play against like any of those like heavy stacks commanders, but there's still a place for the people to play those and for it to be okay.
Real quick, Matt, can we check your mic in Discord real quick? I saw that you changed positions on it, but it still sounds, I think, a little bit. So I just want to check Discord settings on you real quick.
Because it was on the wrong mic to begin with.
It was on the wrong mic?
Yep.
I was talking to the mic the whole time because it's right there. Sorry, everybody. Now it should be better. Dana Joey, does it sound better for you all?
I didn't notice a change just yet. I'm sorry.
I
But
didn't yet either.
sorry about that. I know I totally derailed the conversation there. I just wanted to catch
You
it.
totally did derail, but do I sound better now?
So
There you
much
go, there you
better.
go.
Chat, we fixed it.
There you
Thanks
go.
for
There we
letting us
go.
know about that, everyone. Yeah.
I
We'd
was
been in
talking
a
in the
call
mic,
for
it was
like
just the wrong mic.
we'd been in a call for like an hour, so I didn't even notice because
Right.
we were just hanging
Yeah.
out. So all right.
But yeah, so yeah, like I said, the brackets is just a perfect place for all of this to exist. Because you're playing at that power level already. I think that it gives them a lot more flexibility. They just like I really appreciate how deliberate the pace is, especially with the new commander format panel. Like commander moves very slow. We're okay with doing that still. Very glad to hear that.
Yeah, like if they printed another version of like Swords to Plowshares 2 Electric Boogaloo, right? Like if they added that, every white deck is going to probably add that new card alongside Path and Original Swords. But if they tell you have to take out Path or Original Swords to add the new one in, well, that makes that card way less powerful. And that's what's happening with these unbanned cards. If you're adding to your deck, you're also there's a lot of subtraction that happens, and that makes them way safer. So yeah.
And having legends too that you can opt out of, like yes, they're powerful legends, but having them be at game changers and B again, like you can opt out of those. You can say, I really don't feel like playing against a Turgid. You can do that. And that's something that's very, very much needed. That's a good release valve for the format because people still want to play these cards. And I don't want to take that away from them, but also I still don't want to like have to subject myself to it. And so like I see where they're coming from, and I at least appreciate that they're giving people a chance to do it. And Andy's a yes. Yes, Discord, you want to change your inputs? No, I don't. I'm going to change them anyways.
It does it all the dang time. It's crazy. Discord is, I'm Discord's so weird. I'm scrolling through the article of just the banned stuff right now, passing by a handful of these. Sway of the Stars, I remember we had joked that it could have been unbanned and not even turned into a game changer, and it probably wouldn't change anything. So I just remember that as a moment from a previous episode.
So I guess the question for the two of you and for chat too, I think it's undeniable Gifts Ungiven is going to be the most played card that is unbanned.
Yeah.
I don't see a world where like any of these aren't, just because of either the social piece or Coalition Victory only goes into 5-color decks. Like, what do you think is the second most played card going to be? Because second Gifts Ungiven.
The other thing about Gifts worth noting too is it's been reprinted a bunch of times, and it was $1.50 or something. Like there's a bunch of people that cracked open Modern Horizons 2 or whatever set that was in packs and like, oh, this is my rare, boo, and threw it in a pile, and they still have it sitting there. So like there's a lot of those sitting around just waiting to go into decks in a way there aren't these other cards.
Yeah, I think the other one that I have my eye on, Matt, and it's actually coming up as we're scrolling now, the one that I would have, if there is any worry for me, Panoptic Mirror was a card that I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to live in that world. Since it does effectively, when it's abused most, it does effectively kind of meet the description of being a combo card, basically. And like combo is a thing that the brackets do already like have a space for, or that they regulate. It costs a lot of mana to pull off that kind of thing, which is fine. But like there are play patterns that emerge when you put even just like a Wrath or whatever under Panoptic Mirror. I'm like, cool, game got a lot less fun, and I enjoy that less than I enjoy the combo. At least the combo, I know the game's over.
The wind comes out of the sails immediately.
Yeah, so I think if there's another one that I have my eye on most with like, I think that this probably like is a little bit like a womp womp for play experience. Panoptic Mirror is one that I think could see broader adoption compared to the others. It's colorless, that's why. But like I think it also strikes me as another one of those, like, given the nature of the way it is comboing, yeah, it probably does self-regulate, but it's one that I'm just kind of like, give me some side eye on this guy.
Yeah. On the other hand, I also say like it's so easy to put any counter spell underneath Isochron Scepter, and like you don't see that you don't see it happen though, because I think people just don't like that play pattern, even if you're the one doing it. Like I have years ago had it in a deck and a couple times for myself with the right spell in hand and a Isochron Scepter there, and like, oh well, let me do this. People just don't do it. I would imagine we'll see some of that, particularly with the egregious Panoptic Mirror combos, where people will do it, and in 6 months you just outside a dedicated deck built around doing something really specific with it, you're just not going to see folks throwing a time walk underneath it very often,
Probably.
unless you're in a really specific, like playing bracket 4 kind of stuff.
And they also, mentioned like, the state of removal at the time that Panoptic Mirror came out and was banned in EDH is different than the state of removal here in the format today too.
Very true.
And I think that argument applies to a lot of cards too, though. Like
exactly.
If you watch the stream, the world that Primeval Titan was released into, very different than the world today. Right. But that applies to literally every single card that's on the ban list, because again, Commander moves very, very slow.
Dana, I had a bet of when Matt would bring up Primeval Titan.
That's fine. You knew it was going to happen. I mean, I did. Blake waited till like the very end of the weekly stream to get his Canadian Highlander reference in. Mm-hmm. I just get out of the way early. Let's get Primeval Titan mentioned before we move on.
I actually, one thing I also want to call out here just real quick, I feel like I should have mentioned it sooner, to be honest, is how dang transparent, like the level of communication that we're getting about all this stuff is wildly comprehensive to me. And I think I'll switch over to the beta article here, the Brackets beta announcement. I know I'm scrolling pretty fast, folks. But like even this section of cards that they didn't change, or cards that were added and stuff like that, cards they discussed, I'm just impressed that they would be like, hey, here's the other kind of stuff that has currently tripped our radar. Because I think there's a world in which we don't get that type of information. And so I'm just like, all right, cool. That is like that is transparent. And that is very, very cool.
Getting insights to cards they didn't put on Game Changers or didn't ban or anything like that. Like cards just like, hey, we're thinking about this. Here's what the conversation revolved around. There's not another game that you get that type of transparency. Like I know that they do dev blogs for a lot of like games like League of Legends. I've been enjoying Path of Exile and their dev chats, and like they don't get this deep though.
Have you seen Yu-Gi-Oh players react to the level of transparency that Wizards gives to its player base compared to like what Konami gives to the Yu-Gi-Oh player base?
Right.
That means I have to know. I can't know what Yu-Gi-Oh players are saying because I don't know any Yu-Gi-Oh players. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, fair enough.
So,
yeah. All right. So generally, though, in terms of like the stuff that was unbanned, we're feeling good. Like,
yeah.
I don't think there's nothing problematic.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's anything. There's very few things, I should say, very few things that are still left on the ban list that if you made a modern era ban list, you would need to put back on there. They could be a little more aggressive, I think. I appreciate their deference not being overly aggressive with unbanning cards. But I don't think that there's anything problematic. There's very powerful stuff that's kind of undeniable, but the format is all about powerful stuff. So I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah. I'm going to scroll through now some of the cards that are still banned and why they left them still banned. To me, I feel like there are a couple of other places they could have aimed that still would have been like kind of fine or kind of regulated by the bracket system. I think in a past episode I had wagered that they might go up to like 8 or 9 bans, and we'd like tease that we'll make a bet, and we never actually made a bet about it. But I think there could have been some other spots to aim. An example I had mentioned was that Sundering Titan to me fits a description of MLD and therefore immediately slots into bracket 4 only.
Right.
So I could have imagined that, but they didn't go for it, and it seems like probably a softer volley seems like the wiser approach here is maybe the way to phrase it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Just a slow trickle even too. Like instead of dumping everything and having like this massive like churn of the format, they're just going to let it evolve naturally with the way it normally does with a slow amount of cards coming in and doing all that. So.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, even going by the cards like Biorhythm, I don't think is that big of a deal. Emrakul, it's in the command zone most of the time when it's problematic. Arayo is an interesting case. I think that Arayo probably should stay banned. We didn't really talk about Arayo that much when we talked about the ban list. We did that episode
because I think no one wants to make a case to bring it back.
I think that like it came up in the context of like the same thing as a Braids situation. Like you can see this if you don't want to play against Arayo in the command zone. That is a relatively easier thing to avoid. And sort of an immediate impression for me is that if they add more legends to the Game Changers list, I'm personally not opposed to that, because the card that you've tutored to your opening hand in every single game feels to me like it has one of the biggest effects on how that game is going to go. But it does have a self-regulating piece of it as well that assists with things socially. But if there is a place that it feels like has not been of the big changes that they made, it feels like the number of legends is one of the things that has remained relatively stable, which they also addressed in the video and stuff. If you start adding stuff like Corvold and Edgar and like yada yada, there's so many things you could put in that list that it seems like you'd be opening a floodgate. And as you said, they want to keep it a trickle.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad to, I believe Gavin mentioned it in his video, the approach with Legends is going to be not just are they powerful, but are they powerful and unfun to play against? And having that lens is a little bit of a shift, especially from when the rules committee was in charge. I think that's going to let a lot of cards maybe move to game changer status. I think Iona, maybe like the formats and the games when Iona was legal, I mean, it was overwhelming, but then also like if you're only playing it in bracket 3 and 4, people are kind of learning to play against it a little bit more. And they are playing that removal that everybody like loves to use as a cop out too. So it's interesting. There's a lot of layers to literally this entire decision.
Yeah. I don't think there are, as like an immediate impression, other cards that I'm like, oh, I wish that they had like. There's none of them are ones that like I'm like, oh, I'm gunning for them to definitely unban stuff. I think if there's any that does strike me as like, I think that we can't afford to like put Legends in game changer status because there's a self-regulating piece to them, maybe. And you opt out, and there are some other things that I think they could have aimed at that to me feel like they automatically regulate to a high-powered bracket, such as Sundering Titan. I don't like Sundering Titan. I don't want to see it. I just think it would auto-regulate as an MLD card that they've already placed in bracket 4, which I think makes it safe, but I'm not bummed that it didn't get there. If anything, I'm happy about it. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to piss off about half of the chat right now that seems to want Lutri back. Of all the legends that are on the ban list, I think Lutri and Nadu, probably Gristlebrand, are the 3 that I don't think should be revisited because of the bracket system. They're too free, I think, especially Lutri. I don't know if it adds. Yeah, poor Lutri. Sorry, you have other otters to play.
Now, if they were to bring back Bandit's Commander, that's a whole different conversation, I think, for a lot of this stuff. But we're not there yet.
Right. You don't
do
like
you guys
the idea
even
of
want? Do you even want Bandit's Commander back?
I don't. I'm just saying, like, if people want to free some of the stuff up, that makes it easier. Like Raphaelos in your elf deck probably isn't a problem, but it's a problem in zone. Grizzlebrand, same thing. Like Grizzlebrand in your mono black demon deck or something isn't going to be an issue for most people. Like by the time you're dropping Grizzlebrand, you're dropping something busted. So like those would be fine if they're banned as commander.
I don't think I agree on that one. But I'm also the resident reanimator, like doing gross necromancy. Like the into reanimating Grizzlebrand immediately kind of play pattern strikes me as like a whoop.
But you're playing on but then you're talking like bracket 4 kind of stuff, in which case I don't think it's a problem.
I don't
like if you're trying to reanimate Grizzlebrand in bracket like 2 or 3, and you're like, well, technically, like, come on, that's also like. Now, you're not being honest about what you're doing.
Well, if it turns into a game changer, it wouldn't be in bracket 2, but even in bracket 3, I think it'd be kind of like I like that. Ben Deckard seems sus. I agree. That's my vibe. And a lot of this is kind of the vibes. I think that's actually, Matt, as you were talking about, like, this is about the intent. Like, they cop to the fact that their original announcement put so much focus on the game changers itself, which was one of the pieces of feedback that we gave them before everything was announced, was just like, hey, people are going to look to this as sort of one of those Dragon Ball Z power level like identifiers using exactly a mathematical formula, and really like this is about vibes. And so like them copying to that and like putting a greater emphasis on, come on, you know what you're doing. If you're trying to.
The clarity behind all of that too, because that was one thing that I think just the communication around, yes, we do get a lot of transparency, but sometimes the communication around that isn't always the best. Because we had, if folks remember, we had the announcement of the brackets, that article came out, the shift and everything. And then a day later, Rachel Weeks put out that original graphic that had a lot of like depth and explanation to it. But so many people were already caught up in what their initial reactions. Right. They didn't see that updated, okay, here's some clarity around it. And so we kind of had to wait till that next announcement. And that was even my first thought when I saw that they were doing an announcement today, whenever they announced it a month and a half ago, whatever. my first gut was they're going to clean up the game changers with a lot of the feedback, and then they're going to give a lot of clarity that they just didn't give in the initial announcement that had to trickle out on socials instead of one centralized place. And that was kind of a whoopsie, I think, in how they handled it.
Yeah. So the unbanned, does this affect any of your decks as well? Like, are these cards, the Gifts Ungiven, Sway, Braids, Coalition Victory, like, I assume, knowing the three of us, having done the show for so long, these are not cards we plan on touching. Matt, it sounded like maybe you might play a Gifts Ungiven here and there, like in one deck?
I'll play Gifts a little bit.
Yeah. Are there
maybe
any
a deck or two? It depends. And so I've got a couple bracket 3 decks. I don't have any bracket 4 decks that are playing blue, I don't think. I would have to look back at my decks again,
man.
But a lot of Selesnya, a lot of green white. The Gifts will find its way into decks for me, though. It definitely will. Where Gifts is going to probably show up is in like my Coma Cosmos Servant deck. It's going to be a lot of bracket 3 stuff where I might end up taking other game changers out in order to make room for Gifts.
Yeah. Dana, any of these that you think you might play?
The ones I had, I already sold this morning.
Wow.
to be able to buy actual interesting cards. So I mean, that's what it'll do for me. I got rid of the couple I had, and we'll actually get things that are fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I only actually even owned one or two Gifts Ungiven anyway, so it's not like I'm profiting. Like, I absolutely did buy, because I don't play a bunch of decks that like are going to take advantage of Gifts Ungiven.
Yeah.
So having like one or two just like I just accumulated over the years is whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I did buy a bunch of Primeval Titans after the initial bracket announcement, because I'm going to put that in all my green decks, at least all my like bracket 3 and up decks.
The fact that you're saying that is why Dana and I think it should stay banned, Matt.
Exactly.
Hey, I'm just one person. I'm not an entire format of people with self-control.
You're saying the Magic community has self-control? Where have you been? Which community? I would love to be her. Like, that's...
Yeah, like Dr. Glaxer mentioned, Gifts would be a huge CDH card. Yeah, that card's going to show up in a ton of CDH decks, I would imagine.
That seems the biggest shift.
That would be the big one. Yeah.
Because Intuition was also placed as a game changer too, right? Like, sort of equivocating what those cards are each capable of. If there's a shift, it definitely happens in that area because of what Gifts is capable of. But I'm kind of interested to see other stuff that it is capable of too, I suppose. I don't know. It's a tutor, so I'm like, I don't think that I will play it. I do have I have a bracket 4 Mimeoplasm deck. Gifts probably belongs there.
I was wondering if you're going to find room. I was wondering if you're going to find room for it there, because that is a prime Gifts Ungiven. Like, I got to do the reaction article that we released on EDH Rec, where I kind of broke down all the bans. So if folks haven't read that article yet, it's over on EDH Rec. The biggest benefactor from Gifts Ungiven being unbanned is like all those Mimeoplasm players, because there's still a bunch out there.
Perfect. It's a perfect deck for those.
Yeah. So I probably will. I don't know. Mimeoplasm, I have every so often I'm just like, should I detune you so that I can play you more? So we'll see the vibe. But I have a gift set I opened from a master set, so it'll probably end up in there. And that's it. I think that's all I got. The rest of it, I doubt I don't know. If I'm gonna see anything, I'll kind of going back to an earlier question. We said like Panoptic Mirror is one that I think I have my like eyes on worry wise. I imagine a lot of 5-color players have been really excited to do Coalition Victory things, because you usually can just like have your commander out and win the game. But it's possible that has the Primeval Surge problem of like, you did the thing one time and then you're like, oh, okay, well, I got that full experience, and then maybe it loses its luster. So I could anticipate there being a surge of Coalition Victory and then a drop off of Coalition Victory presences. But if there's anything that jumps up, it might be that one.
I do think that's likely.
Yeah, I try to play most of my games with people who are interesting, so like I'm probably not going to see it very much. But
Dana, dang.
That's why he played against me when we were all together.
There we go. Yeah, Matt and I just got a couple games, and I say that I'm partially kidding. I get why. But like, it's one of those things. Primeval or Primal Surge is a perfect comparison. Like, I'm betting it's the kind of card that you'll do it a couple times and get like that. Oh, that was actually kind of cool. I got to pull it off. And do it a second time, then you're like, and then you're probably just gonna pull it. Like, it's one of those that is a thing that oftentimes happens, and I'm gonna guess we'll see a lot about the Coalition Victory.
Yeah. So so far we've mentioned the bans quite a bit, but I think one of the other things for us to shift to is also all of the cards that were added to the game changers list.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to hit the two that got taken off it real quick, since that's just a real fast topic?
Yeah, actually, I love that. Sorry to tease you, everybody. Let's switch it up.
I mean, for my decks, a lot of them, it was kind of a neutral game changer amount. I see a lot of people in chat are talking, I have a bunch of 3s that have 4 game changers now. Most of my decks that are bracket 3 with 3 game changers still have 3 game changers because Trouble in Pairs got taken off, but then Teferi's Protection got added. So it's a wash for a lot of my decks.
And to speak on that briefly, because cards did get added more beforehand, I was not running into, like, I was not bumping on that that ceiling of like 3 game changer threshold. Mm-hmm. And to me, it actually strikes me as a good sign that, like, oh, there are things that have now moved to, I have to make some difficult choices, which, Dana, is something you had mentioned before, that having 3 game changers felt like, okay, I do have to, like, kind of get choosy here, and it is forcing me to scale back on some of these very powerful Smothering Tithe or Ancient Tomb or whatever type of cards.
Which, again, is an argument for prime time. If you put in Primeval Titan,
you're derailing my point. I'm reclaiming my time. How dare you? For me, I had not hit that ceiling, and now I feel like I am. So my Thalis deck is a biggest example here. It went from having, I think, like 2 game changers in it, and now with the new announcement, it technically has 4. And that is, to me, a sign to, like, well, yeah, because I don't need an Ancient Tomb in there now. So that is the kind of thing where, like, now I'm forced to actually make that difficult choice about where I want this deck to land, and that wasn't as obvious beforehand. And so I'm quite happy by, like, if you're running into that ceiling, folks out there, I think that actually is a good sign for you to figure out that threshold of, like, do I keep committing and supercharge it, or do I take one of these out and make sure that it's placed where I wanted it to be? So that's kind of the vibe that I have overall. Anyway.
Because the 2 cards removed were Trouble in Pairs and Trinisphere, right?
Yes.
Correct.
In Trinisphere, like, it's one of those cards, you're either playing a deck that is doing Trinisphere things or you're not. Like, there are very few people that were like, oh, man, I would really wanted to run Trinisphere, but it's a game changer, so I can't. Like, your deck was either doing Trinisphere kind of things and had a bunch of those effects, and maybe you had to pull it out to make it fit in the bracket you wanted, but, like, I doubt it. Mm-hmm. That one's it's just such a specific card doing a specific thing. Whereas Trouble in Pairs is just one of White's best draw options, but it's maybe okay. Like, if Mystic Remora is fine in blue, Trouble in Pairs is probably fine in white.
Mm-hmm. Well, if Trouble in Pairs is okay in white, then what about the Great Henge, Guardian Project, Beast Whisperer, like all the green like draw effects and green draw engines that, like, are just as good, if not better, than Trouble in Pairs. Well, none of this is to say Trouble in Pairs is not a powerful card.
Absolutely. Well, the relevant thing about Trouble in Pairs, to me at least, that I don't know if bothered's the right word, but, like, that jumped out at me when it was first added to the Game Changer list was the drop off from Trouble in Pairs to the next white source is pretty significant. And there's not a lot of them below that. That's not to say Rhystic Study isn't busted, because it's a crazy card. But, like, if you can't run Rhystic in a deck, you've got 40 options to replace it with for blue draw effects. Maybe not enchantments, but, like, a one-off effect in enchantment, whatever, a creature. In white, that's not how it is. Like, when you're pulling out Trouble in Pairs, you're like, ugh, whatever I replace it with, I'm really feeling it. And yes, you're feeling Rhystic Study, but you've got a pretty good option to replace it with. That's just not true in white. So I think that's why I was glad to see this one removed, is because, mono white decks, Boros decks are really going to appreciate having that option again.
Yeah, Medic, I agree. Great Henge is better than Trouble in Pairs.
Really? I don't think I agree on that. Oh, interesting.
What?
I'm kind of.
I think Trouble in Pairs stands out so much because of the point Dana just had, where the second best option behind Trouble in Pairs is so far behind in terms of power and consistency, whereas there's just such a density, and we're just used to it in so many other colors.
Yeah. Oh, green is the color of card draw, like, just straight up. That Wizards really committed to that when they started changing the way that. Like, the frequency at which green draw cards. I think that they went pretty wild with that. But to me,
it's tough to tough to remove the colors from the equation, because, like, when I look at a deck that's got green, and I'm like, this one, yeah, probably doesn't need to run Great Henge. Whereas look at white, any of my white decks, I'm like, man, I'm really strongly considering Trouble in Pairs. But that's because of what's around it, not necessarily the cards themselves.
I think you said it better than I could. Yeah, I think there are green decks I play that Great Henge would not be useful compared to. I can't think of a situation like that for white. So I like your summary there a lot.
Yeah.
I probably personally, I think I would have kept Trouble in Pairs on the list rather than taking it off, but I'm not much bothered, and I like the points that y'all brought up with it. So the Trinisphere and Trouble in Pairs being removed from the list, very nothing burger to me, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did see a comment earlier that.
What about the million cards that we're adding to the Game Changer list then?
Well, yeah, so that's just it. Those were the ones that were removed. Now we can get to the ones that were added. The Game Changer editions, scrolling down here, 18 cards are being added.
Which is basically a list of every card that content creators talked about after the original Game Changer list was released. It's like the greatest hits of cards. People were like, well, why wasn't this on the Game Changer list?
Not necessarily, because I was shouting from the rooftops, Great Henge should be a game changer, and
yeah, and
proof nobody listens to me.
They mentioned the reasons for it. It's listed as another one down there, but yeah, it's lower on my list for sure. Immediate impression, the Game Changer list went from like 40 cards to 60. How are we feeling numbers wise? To me, I'm gonna give an immediate thumbs up. Game Changer list expansion was a thing I had said a handful of times that I really wanted to see. So just starting from the concept of, all right, cool, it's a larger list. How are we feeling?
I was expecting 10, not 20, but I'm perfectly fine with 20.
Yeah, I was talking last night, and it feels like there's 3 different categories of these cards. One is clerical. It's getting all the tutors, getting all those things that fall in line, and there's uniformity among the different colors, whether it's stuff like Natural Order, Worldly Tutor, Gamble, stuff like that. Then there's the stacks pieces, the Narset Parter Veils, the Consecrated Sphinx a little bit.
Yeah.
Cards that like wheel decks, it's going to be, you actually have to work for it in brackets too in order to make a wheel deck. Basically, is like how the game changers.
Yeah, like those are I guess I wouldn't call like that stacks necessarily, but I do see what you mean in terms of like
punishing cards, stopping you from doing something, and then just the rest. That third category is just powerful cards that probably should have been flagged, and people got a lot of feedback around. I'm curious what you guys think. Not so much like, do you have any like objections to any cards? Because I think there's arguments that we all can give credit to why these should be on there. Are there any cards that surprised you to be on this list?
Yeah,
like you didn't, like you weren't anticipating this being on a Game Changer list.
Biggest one for me was Notion Thief, actually, just because it is multicolored. It being multicolored does have a little bit more of a, not self-regulating, I guess, but like it is harder to show up in places.
Yeah.
So if it comes down to like the kinds of things that you can combo with wheels, monocolored cards that you can combo with wheels felt of more interest to me. So seeing a multicolored one was like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So that was probably the biggest eyebrow raise for me, at least.
Yeah, for sure. I'm Medic in chat said crop rotation surprised me. That was the biggest thing to me too. Having crop rotation along with Field of the Dead. I understand Field of the Dead is a very powerful card. But crop rotation and Field of the Dead at the same time felt targeted a little bit. That is probably the most surprising thing is crop rotation. Not that lands aren't powerful, but it just feels out of place compared to just on a power level wise compared to a lot of these other cards. Like Deflecting Swat. Deflecting Swat is an amazing card. Free counterspell effectively.
Glad to see that one.
Glad to see that. I'm glad Red doubled its size and representation. I still think that there's, but Red's kind of weird because a lot of what Red does falls under mass land denial, which is already bracketed to bracket 4. So I think by design, Red might be underrepresented on Game Changers.
By design is I think what those are the words I'm latching onto immediately. A lot of Red's quote Reds game changers I think fall within the artifacts that are currently like the One Ring and stuff like that. When I look through the list of red cards that I would be like, oh, we better put this up there, it is a pretty dang short list for me, whereas a lot of decks that are doing red things are doing a lot of the things that like already are game changers, a lot of those artifacts feel present there. I feel like that's kind of one of the things that is being tackled there, whereas some of those artifacts don't show up quite as much for decks of other color combinations. So I'm not as worried about red. I was happier to see green get more attention on the list, because I think that felt more lacking than red felt lacking.
Gamble and crop rotation were my two biggest surprises, especially with Field of the Dead becoming a game changer. Most of the cards that are problematic that you could fetch with crop rotation are cards that are now game changers. So like I felt like it was already kind of controlled a little bit by the fact that like the things you would get with it that would be most problematic are things that you also need to devote a slot to. So I was surprised at that, but I'm also not like, I don't think it's a bad choice. It's a card that almost only gets used to alter the game in a significant way for very little mana. So I'm okay with seeing that on there. Gamble is not one of those cards that like, Gamble can be very powerful, but people aren't using Gamble for the most part to do really powerful things outside of maybe, bracket 4 or a really powerful bracket 3 kind of list. Which is probably where it belongs. So like I didn't necessarily think that was an issue. That wasn't a card where like I don't think people in bracket 2 were like, ha, I'm running Gamble because technically it's not a game changer. I just don't think that was happening. And if it's not happening, then does it need to be a game changer? If people are self-controlling themselves with it, but I also understand the logic.
Yeah. I think just like handily getting a lot of the 1 mana stuff, particularly instant 1 mana tutors. Like I see the logic there to try and like be consistent across that idea, that oeuvre. It's interesting to me to hear the surprise about crop rotation, I guess. Not that I disagree. Like I think Worldly Tutor struck me as a much more important thing than crop rotation. I think where I fall with crop rotation and the Field of the Dead combination is that one of the ways that I felt the original list of game changers was significantly lacking was addressing lands matter decks. Not just landfall, but like things that use lands in a very particular way. It felt easiest for those types of decks to fly under the radar as, look, I'm just a bracket 2. Whereas now these are ways that you can sort of differentiate between a landfall deck versus that landfall deck. And I'm happy to have those types of signposts. So I feel pretty comfortable with them, I would say, particularly Field of the Dead for its ubiquity.
Ubiquity is the thing for that card. Like there was so many times I would see Field of the Deck in a deck where it's just like, oh, I'm running it because I have one and that's really good and it's just automatically going to proc because of my land base. It required no thought on my part to put it in my deck and have my deck just automatically do a really powerful thing if I top decked it. And that just feels bad to play against because it feels, I don't know if unearned is the right word, but it just doesn't feel like, I don't mind getting blown out when the person does something cool. It sucks getting blown out because the person like top decked Field of the Dead and played it. And the next turn, next 3 turns just happen to have like fetch land variants in hand. It just feels terrible.
Yeah. I mean, my Omnath Locus of Rage deck finally has game changers in it.
Right.
So,
which I do take as a good sign, right? Because that shouldn't be allowed to purport itself to be anything other than a bracket 3, like that. I think that's the way it reads to me.
Yeah. I mean, the only other card that still kind of feels weird is Orcish Bowmasters because it's only as good as the pods you're playing it in. There's kind of an effect of where like it should be a game changer because when you play it at the game changer tiers, it's going to be really good. But if you're playing it against like a bunch of like nonsense decks, it'll get you like a 3/3 over the course of a game. It feels a little out of place just because it scales so much with what the rest of the table is doing. Not to say it isn't powerful, but it doesn't feel like a game changer necessarily to me in Commander because, it is so squishy. It requires your opponents to be doing a lot of other stuff. And as a person that has a deck built around you requiring your opponents to do a bunch of stuff for you to get bonuses, sometimes there's a game where just like half of my deck is dead because my opponents aren't doing enough.
The one thing I would say about Bowmasters is at least in my experience, it suffered a little bit from that Dockside Extortionist problem, or people had one and so they put it in their deck and like, well, it must be perfectly fine because it's not banned, it's not in the game changer list, and I have a cool one, therefore I'm going to play it in this bracket too. It's the opposite of Gamble, where I feel like people people don't run gamble unless they're like intentionally aware of the power level they're playing at. I feel like Orcus Bowmaster is one of those cards that like people for whatever reason felt it gave them permission to run it in places where it wasn't appropriate.
It felt like they were, like Matt, you were saying that they were, the crop rotation and Field of the Dead felt particularly targeted. The wheels aspect of it all feels most targeted here. Like they put multiple presences on that because wheels does cover a lot of different colors within the genre. So I think that's one of the impressions.
Now you're gonna have to.
Oh, go ahead.
You're gonna have to. Yeah, you're gonna have to earn your wheels wins with Underworld Dreams, like they used to do in 1994.
Sure. But and also like I'll say this, and I don't want to be. I hate. Despite my joke about Coalition Victory earlier, has anyone ever played against a fun wheels deck, like where you had a good time? Because it isn't. You're kept from playing anything and take a shitload of damage for a person just playing a single card. I think it's kind of a miserable archetype anyway, so I'm perfectly fine with them handicapping it. Same with Notion Thief to a degree. Not necessarily
handicapping it, but just relegating it.
Yeah.
Relegate's a good word. I like
relegating it, and that's where a lot of these, especially when you get to like the unfun levels of that, because it's so easy. It's kind of like landfall decks where it's so easy to make a landfall deck that just accidentally does the thing a little too well. I think wheel decks, there's a really, really strong argument that wheel decks can do the same thing, where it's a little too easy to like, you only need, you have a bunch of wheels. If you're playing a Grixis wheel deck, like you're playing Nekasar or whatever, and you only need one of these other cards. Like you only need a Narset, you only need a Orcish Bowmasters, you only need a Notion Thief to make it the most unfun version of that. And there's so much redundancy that I'm not making it like harder or whatever, but like relegating it is my preferred vernacular, I would say, to putting these wheel decks at bracket 3, bracket 4, where you're playing with people who are expecting to have that type of game already.
Yeah, I like what Imperial Version has said here in the chat. If we're using numbers, Nekasar is still the number 13 most popular commander on EDH Rec, and that one definitely shows you the power of a card like Orcish Bowmasters. Yeah, it felt like all of those cards kind of situate in there. And I'll agree with another comment here from Mama Angel. Narset and Bowmasters as game changers. There's a symmetry to those, whereas like the one that I said earlier is a surprise. Notion Thief feels like a step away, maybe. But again, not mad at it, I guess.
And I will also
I don't think the Notion Thief step down from Narset Parter Veils, I don't think it's near as steep of a step down as Trouble in Pairs is to the next white draw effect too. Like I think that gap is a little bit closer than anything else.
Fair.
And I will also note to puncture an argument, you can see based on the commander when a wheel stack is coming 99% of the time.
Yeah.
So like if it's something you don't want to deal with because you're like, I just don't want to sit here and have no agency all game, you can just not do that too. So like, you know, I'm kind of arguing against myself by saying that, but it's worth noting that that's the counter to wheel stacks. If you don't want to play them, you'll see it coming almost every time.
I think, and this is something that I've probably danced around conversationally, but I'll make sure that I properly state it, is just, I like the idea, like, I don't think Signpost bans work, but I think Signpost game changers do have merit to sort of differentiate between a wheels deck versus that wheels deck, between a land deck versus that lands deck, and artifact versus that type of artifact deck. Like, that feels to me like the purpose of, like, being able to differentiate between this is the bracket 2 and it's going to be very social and it's not trying too hard versus, okay, we're stepping things up a little bit type of bracket 3 play. So covering more archetypes there, having a small number of Signpost cards across different archetypes, I'm happy to see with quite a lot of these, to be honest. And it seems like wheels and lands were the things that they had to address most. And that's cool. Dan, I know your Sphinx deck was just affected by Consecrated Sphinx, which I'll actually say that also struck me as a surprise.
And Teferi's Protection.
And Teferi's Protection, yeah. Teferi's Protection, not a surprise. Glad to see that there. Consecrated Sphinx?
No.
Yeah. I think I had in my head that we had kind of like moved past the demon it once was. So I think
I haven't seen one aside from mine and my Sphinx deck in a long time.
I think that's it, yeah.
I mean, I understand why it's absolutely powerful, but yeah, it's just a card I don't think sees a ton of play anymore. But I absolutely get it.
Yeah.
Which of these cards impacted you guys the most? Like that you're going to have to make the most changes?
Teferi's Protection for me, for sure.
Yeah,
like I mentioned at the start, a lot of my decks either like stayed even because they had the trade-off of Trouble in Pairs coming off, but Teferi's Protection going on.
Yeah.
There's only like a couple others. Like I said, Omnath Locus of Rage has a couple game changers now because of these, but
Mm-hmm.
most commonly for me, Teferi's Protection. And I think that's probably like a fairly common thing that people are going to notice.
Well,
I agree.
and to talk about a card where people have no self-control with, I have no self-control with Teferi's Protection. I'm
You had
playing
no
white.
self-control with Ancient Tomb, though.
It and Ancient Tomb are the two cards where I was like, oh, I'm building a deck. Let's get an Ancient Tomb, and is it white? Let's get a Teferi's Protection. Like that's just what I did. So I am going to make no attempt to justify Teferi's Protection not being a game changer. It should be a game changer, and the fact that they put it on the list, I'm having to look at my decks, going, oh man, there's nothing else that really like is close to doing what Teferi's Protection does.
Mm-hmm.
Tells you exactly how powerful it is and why it should be a game changer.
I mean, I do think that there's an argument that Clever Concealment, the gap between Teferi's Protection and Clever Concealment isn't all that big. From what I've been playing,
the fog effect on Teferi's Protection, though, is, like I use it for a fog a lot.
Yeah, it is good. I'm just saying,
Concealment's great. Clever Concealment's great. Don't get me wrong.
I'm just saying again. It's another case of like I don't think it's this huge gap. I think the power level is fairly small. So if you're trying to stay in bracket 2 and you got hit by Teferi's Protection going on here, cards like Clever Concealment, I think, or Flawless Maneuver. There's a lot of options. Like you don't. Yeah, it has a lot of really, really valid replacements that you're not missing on all that much, honestly.
I like half agree on that. I think it's got good replacements in bracket 2. I'd be delighted to see some of those other ones. But the power of Teferi's Protection to me does seem like it really justifies being a step away from those and therefore having that relegation of the bracket. You had asked the things that your decks are most affected by. Field of the Dead is my answer. I had that in probably 4 decks.
Sure.
I think I have Titania, which I already knew was a high power deck, but it didn't register as having any game changers in the initial list. So I'm like, all right, happy to see that one of my most powerful decks finally has something that's mentioning it, that and crop rotation for that deck. But I also had Field of Dead in Baba. I have it in my Wilhelt deck. I have it in Thalise because it makes tokens, it makes zombies. I do stuff with lands. Like, it is a very diverse card across decks that I was like, these are powerful. My Wilhelt deck should register as a 3. My Baba deck should definitely register as a 3 somehow. And so like these were good clues for me. And so I'm happiest to see something like Field on there, but it does have the broadest effect on my list of decks and in terms of like which ones hit me most. That and or deflecting SWAT for the decks that I do play red in. But
and one thing I wanted to ask Gavin, because I'm genuinely curious of, I'm wondering if Field of the Dead and Mishra's Workshop, although Workshop there's like 9,000 copies in existence, literally, like I think that like there's not many of them that are actually out there, but I wonder if Urza's Cave has impacted the amount of lands in this deck, particularly Field of the Dead. It's giving you a colorless way to get that on demand. I'm curious. I would like to ask Gavin next time we talk to him about something to see what he says about that.
Urza's Cave, interesting. Yeah, that's just it. Matt, when you said earlier, like Primeval Titan isn't the card that it used to be, that one keeps getting better. And like I think Crop Rotation's presence on the list is a testament to that, right? Like that is a spell that does a lot of different things, and that even with like being able to get a Talongates and Madara for Crop Rotation to save a creature, like even little stuff like that, the cards get continually more and more versatile. That spell is no longer just find a land. That spell is find a spell and cast it. And that's what
solve a problem.
Yeah, very, very.
Or make a problem in the case of Field of the Dead.
Yeah, I am become problem. Yeah, I'm gonna move through. Actually, we've hovered around a whole lot of these, and I kind of want to move now to. I saw some folks talking in chat earlier about the fact that Seedborn Muse is in one of the Tarkir precons, the Defenders deck. And that deck was solidified like a year ago before any of the drama.
Yeah, year and a half.
Yeah. So, that happens. But also Notion Thief was in the Anawan Rogues precon years and years ago too. So, it's going to be weird to see what the precons are. I would almost say, given that, like, a thing that I was maybe kind of hoping to see was a little bit more clarity around the differences between brackets 2 and 3. And that largely didn't go addressed in this. Just because to me, like the average precon experience feels like such a broad statement that it almost has a little less meaning than I want it to, because a precon versus a deck that contains Fierce Guardianship and Force of Will and yada yada, like up to 3 of those still feel like decently different creatures, and I would be interested in more clarity between those differences. And something like Seedborn Muse now being a game changer in a precon, those are the types of things that I think will kind of cause a little bit of confusion around there. And I would hope in future updates that we see as the year goes on that we get a bit more clarity about that, because average precon experience still feels unfortunately very vague to me, especially given situations like game changers being in precons. But
yeah, I feel like the move from bracket 1 to 2 has a kind of a clear vibe difference. The move from 3 to 4 and from 4 to 5 have a very clear, like, you can kind of look at it and know, like, based on what you're trying to do, there's a difference. 2 to 3 very much feels like it's exclusively about the number of game changers in your deck. Versus like a distinct vibe difference based on what you're trying to do. So I agree there could have been a little more clarity there, but also maybe there isn't something that's is easy to point to too. So maybe there's a reason for that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, and if anybody watched the live stream, they did kind of end off with a conversation that Gavin mentions. Like they discussed a bracket 2.5 or a bracket 3.5 to have a little bit of clarity and space for expression between those. And so I don't know what that final form is going to take. That's conversations that I'm sure they haven't even really had, because it's just been, okay, is this something that we should do and whatever. But like none of us are on the CFP. So none of us are privy to those, but Gavin at least did say, again, to the point of their communication, it is something that like they've discussed a little bit and are willing to explore. So
do we think now's the time to move to cards that they didn't change, stuff that didn't make the list or that they didn't take off? Is that where we want to go? Or I don't want to rush us past this point. If
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. You know, they list a handful of examples here, and I'll just, you know, scroll through them. You know, Matt, you had mentioned Great Henge is one that you think should be a game changer. You know, that's not a position that I hold, but that was one that you have registered as a surprise. I'll just actually scroll right to it. And so scrolling, this is one that I was like, Mana Drain was one that I had been like, I was kind of hoping to see it, but they didn't. So all right. So it goes, but let me keep scrolling to the Henge, because that had been one that was present on your mind. But like, if there are changes that didn't happen that we think maybe could have stood to happen, I feel like that's a place to potentially move the conversation, and I want to give us a chance to air it.
Yeah, so I mean, just on the topic of the Great Henge, one argument, my biggest frustration with Great Henge not being a game changer was the inclusion of Trouble in Pairs. It was punishing white for doing what other colors are doing so well, and the Great Henge at least has redundancy that we've talked about already. There's stuff like Guardian Project, Beast Whisperer. Great Henge does more than those because it draws you a card, it gains you life, it is a mana rock, it gives a +1/+1 counter, it does everything. Like, it changes your oil for you if you ask politely.
Does your taxes?
It doesn't do your taxes. It's not a CPA, so don't ask it to do your taxes. But Great Henge is absolutely a powerful card if they're willing to kind of forgive Trouble in Pairs for that. My argument and my sentiments around Great Henge needing to be a game changer does go down. I do want that to be clear. I still think it qualifies. I think it does so many things so well. And everybody gets hung up on, well, it's 9 mana. Nobody pays 9 mana for a Great Henge. That's just not how that works.
But none of... I don't think any of us believe it does cost 9 mana. It does require setup.
I did see some arguments that people were like, LOL, this is a 9 mana artifact. I'm like, LOL, you don't pay 9 mana, shut up. and maybe I shouldn't have told people to shut up. But point is, Great Henge isn't as egregious. I still think that it probably does qualify. But with them kind of recentering everything a little bit and fleshing out the game changer lists, I don't think it's as must include as it was 2 months ago.
Yeah, there are... Oh goodness, sorry, I shouldn't have scrolled. It's not happening. Sorry, I've got Sol Ring on the screen. I actually do appreciate the extra clarity that they brought here in terms of the every deck gets one game changer card discussion. Because I've seen people like make the argument, and this is what they're addressing here, that like make Sol Ring a game changer and every deck gets one game changer. I think that defeats the purpose of bracket 2, where you can safely always be like, I know I'm not going to see a Cyclonic Rift, I know I'm not going to see a Smothering Tithe ever. Whereas if you add a little bit of muddiness, shakiness to whether that is actually true, it kind of defeats the purpose of that part of the system. So I'm glad to see that they addressed it. And that's, yeah, flies in the face of that. I love Gavin's language here. I love his energy. He's just like, listen.
As Dana loves to point out, sometimes we need to be parents, and that means, no, you can't have ice cream for dinner. You have to do what is right for the person, not what they want necessarily.
I understand the logic behind that. You know, it's a game changer. Everyone gets one. But I like the fact that there's a safe space in bracket 2 where you're just like, there's no situation where I'm going to see a rift.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I maybe don't care. I play a lot of bracket 3 where I do see rifts, and I'm maybe fine with that. But I get why folks are like, there's a lot of cards where people's like, I never want to play against that. And I like that there's a space where they can do that and also not be forced to play Ladies Looking Left for a deck down in bracket 1. So I understand the Soul Ring problem, but I don't think that's a solution to it.
It has a logic to it. I definitely see the logic, but it ruins the vibes, even if the logic is there.
Yeah.
And the game changer, especially with 2 and 3, it's about the vibes. So the vibes is what we need to pay attention to. And having one game changer allowed in bracket 2 ruins the vibe of bracket 2. And that is the more important thing for the system to work at all. So anyway, I was just scrolling around. I'm gonna move around to other stuff now, just in terms of like some of the stuff that they addressed, which none of these aside, mana drain was one that they addressed that I was like, I think mana drain could stand to be a game changer personally.
Agreed.
And I was surprised, if anything, to see that they had discussed removing Force of Will from the game changers list. But I don't know, that maybe that's just my taste in tea, you know.
The only way that I would argue Force of Will should be removed is if you replace it with Mana Drain, maybe. Like if you were forcing me to choosing the two, I think Mana Drain is outside of CEDH-ish environments, the strongest of the two. Like a casual Mana Drain is backbreaking. There's no one's casually playing a Force of Will.
Well, so Miles Dakin, I'm sorry, I don't know the pronunciation on the last name there, but saying a higher power category without game changers, there is. It's called bracket 3 and 4.
Yeah, sure.
Like
you can do it without game changers. If you want to do that, you absolutely can.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a point that Gavin covered in his intent piece was, yeah, you can build these things that technically are brackets too, but if you're building them meant to be a high power deck without game changers, and just be honest with yourself and say it's a bracket 4.
Yeah.
Like I had to do that. Like when we did our videos, when we ranked all of our decks, I talked about like I have a lot of decks that are bracket 3 and 4, not necessarily with a bunch of game changers. My Omnath Locus of Rage deck, because of was one of them, because, well, green just didn't get enough game changers, and red basically had none. So
there was and there, I assume there are cards that we had on our list that were not named by the committee. One that I had brought up before was like Phyrexian Altar, for instance. That struck me as a card that supercharges from an Aristocrats deck to the Aristocrats deck, or even is often used as like a combo piece in some ways. So like not seeing that there, and I had seen someone else mention that like it felt like Reanimator decks don't have quite as many like signposts or identifiers. I think I saw that in chat earlier. And I do kind of still subscribe to that. If it's not on their radar, I think I can also understand, though. Those are probably not the strongest types of strategies you can do when you are moving into the brackets 4 and 5 space. So fair enough. But that was another one that had been of interest to me, of just like, oh, you know, no mention. I don't need it mentioned, but also no movement on it. And just like, all right, that's still a thing that I think could be another area for a signpost to be, is in that type of graveyardy area. Or like Hermit Druid was another. I feel like there is a difference between a graveyard deck that does graveyard stuff versus a graveyard deck that does Hermit Druid stuff.
Right.
But also it's a creature that requires summoning sickness, so I'm not going to get too fussed.
Yeah.
Yeah, Barry Cohen, Dictative Arbos, Grave Pact effects.
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely think there's arguments for both of those. I believe they got mentioned in the article. I know Benny Smith has been on a campaign a long time on all of his content against those. I signed that petition as well. I also am glad that like it's also fairly easy to opt out of games with those, because like you can almost judge if somebody's gonna be playing those based off the commander. And so I think I only have one friend anymore that plays those decks. So it's easy for me at least to opt out. But I think there is definitely an argument for them, because I don't think that the setup that Gavin says in this this explanation on screen. I don't think the setup's all that hard, honestly. With how easy it is to make tokens in those decks, it's the same argument, I think, Joey, to your point, for Firex and the altars and those. Yeah. I think the argument is pretty much the same. It's almost too easy to let those be super powerful and game changers.
Well, what's particularly difficult about Grave Pact and Dictate is, first of all, they come as a package. If you ban one, you have to ban the other. So like, or make it a game changer. So you're doing 2 cards right away, not one. And then there's also several other cards that are very, very similar, attached to creatures, mind you, but like, then where do you draw that line at? Versus Aura Shards is Aura Shards. There's one thing that's an Aura Shards.
Right.
And there's no questions that have to get asked about what else we do. You could just say we're hitting Aura Shards and that's it. Versus like, this gets much more nebulous about where you draw the line. So
and Aura Shards,
I get why they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, those are almost the same types of cards. Like I play Aura Shards in my Emil deck. Absolutely, it is a game changer because of the pressure that it applies, not just on what happens like at that moment in the game when it resolves. Like a Farewell. I know a lot of people think Farewell should be a game changer. I think there's a valid argument for it.
Yeah.
Aura Shards should be, and I mean, if we're going to extend that logic the same way, Grave Pact and Dictate should be, not because of what they do when they resolve, but because the pressure they put on the rest of the game moving forward until they're taken care of, because it is very easy to kind of create this insurmountable lead with these cards where it invalidates what people could be doing, where, you know, people might sit there and like, well, I just may as well not play the game because this card exists. You could even say, like, extend that out to Pestilence effects. I mean, Dana, I remember there's a very specific game you and I got to play against with your Pestilence deck back when I had my Valduck deck, where you could kill anything that enters the battlefield at instant speed, no questions asked. You had enough mana. I sat there and like, I may as well just not play this game because as soon as I cast it, Dana's going to kill it, and there's just nothing for me to do about that. I'm playing mono red. It's saying that granted, that was a very specific interaction, and I'm not blaming you, Dana, at all for that.
No, sure.
But just like that pressure that can be applied through cards like Aura Shards and Dictate.
But that brings up a good point, though. So at least in that case, I'm dealing damage to you, and I'm advancing the game. In theory, you know, it's not much fun. Don't get me wrong, but I'm advancing the game towards an end state, and to a degree, that can happen with Dictate and Grave Pact. You can be getting death triggers. You can be doing you can be using those to advance your game to a win condition. Aura Shards, just there's no situation where it does anything but like just remove stuff for people and keep them from playing.
Right.
A piece of that too, and this is one of the things that makes the entire conversation about what is eligible, what isn't, a little muddy, is basically that, like, even in the situation that you just described, Matt, Dana had you on lock because of the nature of those types of cards, and you playing a mono red deck that couldn't remove an enchantment, and that also was very reliant upon its creatures in play. But a player having one other, like player X having player Y on lock, is different than player X having the table on lock.
Correct. Right.
Because there is still that ability for, like, well, we all can gang up on player X to, you know, make sure that we can dethrone them from the archenemy position. And that is always going to have to be an ingredient in discussions like this. I think that's probably why Dictate of Erebus and Grave Pact haven't been touched. There are certain strategies that they do nothing at all to. And, you know, as much as it shuts down like a Voltron or some of the decks that you play, you know, the equipment-y types of stuff that you've got, or
that was just a super specific example that maybe is too targeted, but the point is, this, for the record, chat, I don't think that Pestilence types of effects should be game changers. It's too hard to make them powerful. That was just one very, very specific example.
You were describing a game, not advocating putting them on there. Anyone who misunderstood that is willfully misrepresenting you.
100%.
I think that the Dictate, I think that's, now that Aura Shards is on their radar, that puts these cards more on my radar too.
Yeah.
Because I think there are worlds in which it does shut down an entire table of people rather than just locking out one player. But also sometimes if it locks out one player, certain strategies, certain types of things can be so unfortunate. It's like, ugh, bruh. So there's more of a question mark on my head for cards like these now.
I think the argument though is when you're playing at those levels where you're not necessarily reliant on like a board position creature, stuff like that. That's at higher power levels anyways. That's usually at the brackets 3 and up anyways. A lot of people, especially that are getting into the game, they're not that far along in their Magic journey. Not to say they won't get there, and maybe this is me not giving enough credit to newer players, but just the card knowledge of being able to combo out and do all those things isn't there yet, and it can create some pretty unsavory experiences for newer players, aura shards included. Which is I saw somebody in chat mention aura shards doesn't hit that many card types. Artifacts and enchantments, like, they're super important, and like it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love aura shards. I have zero qualms with it being a game changer.
An ingredient here too is like, are they going to put these types of cards in precons? Like,
I hope not.
Well, that's just it. I don't think
that
they put aura shards in precons, and I think they know why. Ergo, it had to enter the conversation. You know.
Granted,
Yeah.
they counterpoint. They did just put Seedborn Muse in there, and they know what
Well,
Seedborn Muse is.
The difference I would
just
say is
dictate.
Seedborn Muse pushes you ahead versus Aura Shards pulling people backwards.
Right.
And I think they're much more comfortable with a card pushing you towards victory versus a card that pushes everyone away from victory.
You're right, Dana. We should keep Sylvan Primordial banned, brand in prime time unbanned, because Primeval Titan moves you forward, doesn't take away from other people. I'm glad you're coming to the bright side. Dana. This is so great.
Pull this up.
No.
The full list image here now.
Well, I mean, the rest of these, like, I wouldn't be surprised if they put a lot of those cards on there. Like Tooth and Nail. Granted, I don't know the last time I saw Tooth and Nail that happened to come across a game.
Mm-hmm.
The last time I did, I was playing a game with our friend Aaron, and I disdainful stroked it, and they're like, "Why the hell are you doing that?" I'm like, "Because you cast an Entwined Tooth and Nail. You know exactly why."
Yeah. I'm
So the question I have, looking at this list, the question I have, we went from 40 to 60 cards now.
Yeah.
At what point does this become unwieldy? So at 40, I looked at the list a couple of times, and then I just kind of remembered the cards on it. And this was a little bit more. Now I'm like, okay, I'm adding 20 to it, and just in kind of my, not short-term memory, but like just I remember. But it's a little trickier, and now I think we're getting into the space where maybe people can't as easily just remember what's on it, and they have to double check things in a way they maybe didn't. And I wonder if is that going to keep them from going much higher?
It probably does.
I would think so.
I would think that they don't go too much higher, but also I thought the first list was too big. I kind of have, the past few months I've been coming around to Josh Lee Kwai's, the ban list, the game changers list should be as small as possible. People just want to play with the big things, and let them rule zero as they have been to find the places to play it. But I don't know. I was surprised with how quickly players latched on to the 40. I don't think 60 will be too unwieldy.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing the differences on there. I think do I have it? Yeah, we had gone over some data, the number of game changers in decks over time, and we contrasted that against like how people are reporting their decks, because we got some data from Architect about that, about people specifically, not just like us looking at are there game changers in their decks, but specifically people self-reporting. They chose to put those labels onto the deck. Whether they think their deck is bracket 2, 3, 4, or 5, whatever. And there was enough of a difference to me of the distribution of game changers and like how many people are playing versus how many people are saying my deck is a 3, which was this here. Oh, it's a little bit zoomed funky. Sorry about that, folks. Well, hopefully you've seen the episode that we discussed it on originally. But to me, with the number of people who were copping to being at the upgraded level versus how many game changers were actually present in decks, that was a big enough difference to be like, I think that there's room for more expansion here. So that's why I find myself very comfortable with the overall number going up as high as it did. But I agree with you, Dana, that if it gets to 80, we might be playing with fire a little bit there.
Sure.
And I think the only way that it could probably go further into bigger numbers is if they did start putting more commanders onto that list, which I'm not necessarily opposed to, because again, the card that you've tutored to your hand at the start of the game, which is what a commander is, that has the biggest effect on how the game is going to go. So there is potentially more conversation for them to have there. But no.
Well, I also think that the first 40 game changers were just 40 of the most powerful cards in the format anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was very easy for players to remember, well, no, duh, this is a game changer. It's only one of the best cards. Like, just because well, yeah. Like, color me surprised, whatever. Versus the more that we grow it, the more that we're going to start getting to cards where not everybody actually knows what they are all the time or can remember it off the top of their head. So there's that risk. The more that it grows, I hope it doesn't grow all that much more. But 40 cards, it was just, Ristic studies a game changer, cool, and then people move on.
We got that first 40, and I did a significant bit of, what about this? Or okay, but what about this? And looking at this list now, I'm not doing much of that. I'm way less like, why is this not on there? Because I'm like, oh, this feels like it's covering like most of the things that I think it should be covered.
That's a good point. I like that take a whole lot. I think you've captured the way that I feel as well, because it did feel like the original one had certain gaps here, and I feel less aware of gaps now. There are still a small number of standouts to me. I mentioned Mana Drain earlier or whatever, where I could be like, well, what about this? But
right,
I used to be like, well, but what about? And now I'm just like, well, as opposed to feeling like I was tripping over a pothole. Now I think I see what could be considered like a crack in the ground instead of a pothole. So I like the way that you've described that, because I think it echoes the same way I feel. Yeah. Oh, someone is asking about Craterhoof. Did we skip past that? I don't think Craterhoof should be a game changer.
No.
I think definitely now that they've removed a bunch of green tutors, it's way less game changey. Game changery.
Game changery.
Games changer. Like attorneys general.
The game's changed. It
is powerful.
Also,
yeah.
It's not to say that it's not.
And it's one of those cards like if Gavin just right now went on Blue Sky and dropped oh, by the way, we're also adding Craterhoof, forgot to add it. I don't think any of us would be like, what? We'd be like, okay, yeah, that's fine.
I would a little bit. I don't think it needs it. I
don't think it does either, but like it's not gonna wouldn't bother me if it was on there.
Craterhoof is the card that everybody has latched onto that just represents any overrun effect in general.
Kind of, yeah.
Right. Like, there's 15 cards that probably get you the same win that Craterhoof gets you.
100%. I mean, because you have Triumph of the Hordes, you have good old Overrun, you have
Ibex is almost as good. I mean,
Pathbreaker Ibex
cards that get you there.
You have a ton of cards that are going to do roughly the similar or roughly the same type of thing. Again, if we're talking about the gap between the card we're talking about and the next best thing, this gap is probably the smallest of all of them we've talked about. Whereas Trouble in Pairs is the biggest gap of all these cards. Sure. Like what's the wins over replacement if we're using baseball terms? Like this card compared to the next replacement, Craterhoof doesn't have that all big of a gap. Whereas, like I said, Trouble in Pairs is huge gap.
I like Magnus Knacker's point here. Craterhoof is less the problem than the tutors that find the Craterhoof being the problem. Craterhoof being a creature with haste does separate it from a lot of the other cards that we've named so far. But it like if you have a board state that allows Craterhoof to be lethal, cool. That seems like you had to prepare for that, and that seems like a board state that could have been answered a turn previously, or the whole round previously by opponents removing it. So that's why I'm not stressed about Craterhoof. Cards that end games don't feel to me like there are a lot of those, and I don't want to fill up the list with the end game points. I think the list should be focused on the beginning of the game points instead.
There's a couple of different times I've built green, but real tight budget decks, like $25-ish things for someone's show or some kind of contest or something. And multiple times in doing that, I got the commander I was either assigned or picked for whatever reason was green. And I remember like how much it stood out to me every time when I'm like, oh, okay, I need a win condition here. Well, Craterhoof obviously is too expensive, but there's 9 options that are like 85% of Craterhoof for 20 cents. That get you so close that it doesn't matter, and they just cost nothing. So like, yes, Craterhoof is fantastic, but
I mean that
was
why
power. a lot of the power was because you can tutor it, and a lot of the tutors now are also game changers. So yeah, it's just
Well, and that's why I played Pathbreaker Ibex to begin with, is because I didn't want to spend $40 on a crater hoop.
Yeah.
Now Ibex is expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm dating myself, but Pathbreaker Ibex was like $3 when I first got it. And I was like, nope, I don't want to buy a crater hoof. I just want to do this. And I mean, yes, people finally paid attention. But yeah, there's so many varieties of finishers like this.
And it being a finisher, like if I don't know, if your finisher is thwarted by an arachnogenesis or whatever, or a fog, like that also exists in the conversation. We say play more fogs all the dang time. So like I think that Craterhoof both requires setup and has answers in a way that makes me feel comfortable with its presence in games, and not perturbed in the way that like a surprise force of will sometimes can perturb the atmosphere of a game, maybe is the way to say it. So yeah, I do see a comment here. Tutors are not the problem from 40 found. If you tutor the same thing every time, the problem is the thing that you tutor. It's just as boring if you draw it naturally. And that hoof is fine. I agree that hoof is fine, but I don't agree that tutors are not the problem. I think that the boring thing is the tutoring. But that's
I tend to agree with that as well. Because like the thing about a tutors is it's never a dead card. You can say, well, I'm using the tutor and I want to have a couple of different things I can go to get to win. But like, let's say you have those in your hand, you still, then I'm going to get a counterspell to protect it. Or I'm going to go get, like a tutor is always, means you always have the perfect answer, or you even get the perfect answer. And I mean, so yes, I'm with you. I think tutors are a problem.
Yeah. The suspense around having it naturally versus like tutoring it, like cinema. Like that's the big difference is, oh my gosh, does he have it? Does he have the answer? Does he have like I think back to when I was watching a lot of tournaments, like when I was watching a bunch of Standard, Modern, Legacy, and all like the Star City events, stuff like that. Again, dating myself. Knowing people had the answer in hand, like the perfect thing in hand, ready to go. That was always such a wild moment when they finally revealed I had the kill spell the whole time.
Right.
That goes away with tutors, and so
especially when the tutor is hyper efficient. If you're spending 5 mana on a tutor or something, if you're spending even 4 on a diabolic, that changes the math a lot in terms of like how anticlimactic that is. But when it's a vamp or a demonic or worldly tutor, mystic tutor, whatever. The efficiency of that perfect answer is so much,
and the way that it if you play it early, it does change what that game is going to be. And
absolutely,
to key back into the word here of game changers, that is the thing that I keep focusing on. Does the tone of the game change after these cards are used? And particularly the faster that can happen in the game and the trajectory that it sets that game upon, that's where my focus wants to be compared to like finishers like we were discussing earlier.
Trees in the chat. Trees in the chat is a really good comment to build off that, Joy. The drama of the game is oftentimes much more important than the outcome of the game. I very much agree.
Yeah, we very rarely will remember who wins a game. We will remember whether we liked it.
Yeah, good story is a good story.
Exactly. Yeah. All right.
Guess who drew? Yes, there is one thing more cinematic than discarding the tutored card with Gamble, and that is revealing off a Chaos Warp the same thing you Chaos Warp.
Yeah.
The only thing that is equally as cinematic.
Everybody remembers the time they saw that happen.
We've pontificated a lot ourselves here, but I am curious, as we were talking, I'm sure that there are things that we missed. If there are other things that people think this should be a game changer, maybe stuff that wasn't addressed by their article, or things that should come off, changes you would want to see. I am curious to hear more examples from people, or just the general feeling. I don't know. I'm looking at this list here, and I'm seeing green having gone from 3 to 8, and I'm like, correct.
It needed to happen though. As a green player myself, these cards all fit the criteria to be game changers though. So yes, green did get a lot more. I said from the beginning, green is underrepresented on this game changers list. So I'm glad that they finally got there. The only thing that I think is out of balance is red being underrepresented. But also that's by design, like I said earlier, because a lot of things that red would do that could be game changers are automatically ruled out anyways because they're just doing the mass lane denial stuff.
Medic asking about Entomb. Probably not. I think that there's a world in which they address efficient tutors as like a category in the same way that they have addressed mass land denial as a category. And they mentioned in the article, and or at least I remember it in Gavin's video, maybe he says it in both, that they could do development on there, but for now, just like establishing here's the cadence, here's the type of thing that we're looking at. That makes sense. I think putting a thing into a graveyard that you can then do stuff with later, it feels to me like a very different creature than I'm getting the best instant or sorcery from my hand, or I'm getting a land that has an immediate effect on the battlefield, a la the new crop rotation edition. So Entomb doesn't strike me as necessarily in the same category as those now.
So the thing
I do see the argument though.
I do, yeah.
Well,
yeah.
in Toasty, and TCG makes a point about the 3 green cards, the tutors that are basically CEDH cards, because Entomb into something busted is a thing people seem to have self-control over. In my experience, you're only seeing someone entombing for that busted thing in the appropriate place for the most part, and that was the same thing with natural selection or natural order.
Yeah.
For the most part too, and yet that's banned or that's on the game changer list, and Entomb isn't. So like, there's absolutely some inconsistencies. I understand that point completely. It's just where we're at. Yeah, I think Entomb is being used appropriately, so maybe it doesn't need to be a game changer. Worldly Tutor was probably being used appropriately too, but it is a game changer. So like, I don't know, who knows?
Someone mentioned, did we talk about Earthcraft? I think there's a world in which Earthcraft happens. It feels to me a little bit like the food chain that was just added to green, where those are transparently cards that to me don't feel like they're ever used honestly. Combo pieces are so strange because I feel like once you're entering the world of combo, especially particularly efficient combo, that is a category that is addressed by the brackets already. There are reasons to put it on there to identify for people like, hey, here's what we're talking about, and there are reasons to not even have to put it on there because it fits into a different description that the brackets list is already addressing.
Or like talking about green cards like Alurin, like just absolute scumbag card played by just dirtbag people. And
Matt is right here, Dana.
Yeah, why are you coming after me like this?
I think there's fair allurance.
No, there's not. There's not.
There technically could be, but I've never seen one.
So
I also don't feel like Alurin. Again, I feel like Alurin is only played at places for the most part where it's like appropriate to be played. Earthcraft really is too.
I agree. No, there's some amount of there's a Streisand effect going on of Mishra's Workshop, a little not Humility. As much like with Food Chain. Some of these older cards, Humility especially, Humility and Workshop are the 2 big ones where people don't know about these cards because they're just so old and they don't show up in a lot of decks. They're not particularly popular. Not to say they aren't worthy of being here, but people would forget they even existed or wouldn't discover them for the first time. But now we're shining a light on them, and so people are going to discover them now. People are going to, Humility, that shuts down my friend's deck. That like I need that. Mishra's Workshop, that's $1,000, whatever. But so they're going to start proxying it or something like that. Not to say that, again, they do belong there. The power level is there in what they do to the games. I just don't know if the efforts to putting them on there was worth it long term.
Well, and that's a question that's been an issue right for years. There's a handful of cards that are on the ban list still, Wide Red Alexandria, that just aren't seeing play because no one owns them. They're not out there.
Right.
Tabernacle. There's just a handful of these lands from Arabian Nights and Antiquities that just they're priced out of anyone playing them. They're so rare that no one has access to them on the reserve list, whatever. It seems like a bit of a wasted slot. Like no one is playing Tabernacle at places that's not appropriate because no one's playing Tabernacle.
That's
not what you're doing when you have Tabernacle.
Dana, when we got to play a couple weeks ago, I played another game with somebody who.
Yeah, but he knows what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing playing that Tabernacle.
He knows what he's doing, and that he does. He knows what he's doing because he knows he doesn't know what he's doing.
Sure, I guess.
Like, I'm gonna dark ritual into the abyss. Good luck, everyone else.
But outside, like the occasional, person we know that like no one's playing against. But no, that's a fair point. It does happen. You're right. It does happen.
Yeah, I'm seeing someone here asking about Gaia's Cradle. Since Gaia's Cradle is currently a game changer, I assume you're asking if it should be removed. I don't think so.
No.
Like,
Guy's Cradle would be the most proxied land in human history, and it's currently. If you were to ask me what inappropriately powered card I see the most proxied up in games, it would be Cradle. I run into a lot of random Cradles out there where people's like, "Oh, I built an elf deck. I got one proxy in here," and I'm like, "I know what your proxy is. What proxy is it?" "Oh, the Guy's Cradle." And I'm like, yeah, you did.
Yeah, I like Guy's Cradle as a card. I like it as a game changer. I think it fits right in with the. I know that you're committed to this deck, and I know that you're doing things that an average precon experience will not be doing. So it feels perfectly to the game changers list. To my evaluation, at least. And then kind of an awkward question here. Someone, Adrian Para, mentions up near the top of the chat here, do you think Jeweled Lotus would be unbanned? And I guess we did kind of breeze past this earlier, that in the article announcements, they did just not touch, I think he maybe even called it the elephant in the room. I'll try and find that and pull it up here.
Yeah, because Gavin mentioned it specifically.
Gavin mentioned it on the stream as well, that of the 3 cards that were just recently banned last year, the one that he personally felt most likely, and this isn't a professional endorsement, this was a personal endorsement, if one of the 3 did get unbanned, it most likely would be Jeweled Lotus.
Which echoes what we've said too. It seems like that's the general feeling, at least amongst the creator community that we know.
Yeah, we said it on a couple episodes that this is probably the most likely one to come back. Yeah, I don't know what else to.
Personally, I don't
throw out
touch it.
there. I'm glad. I also am glad that they didn't touch it.
Yeah.
Well, for several reasons. For the reasons it was banned and that whole mess, I want to revisit. But I also just don't think I don't think like super fast mana is good for the format. For me personally, I like, if I was a person voting on it, I would vote against unbanning it. But that's me.
Yeah, it's tough because I wouldn't have voted to ban it in the first place. So if there is one, I think Adrian, as you pointed out in your question, I think
it'll be Jeweled Lotus.
Here, Jeweled Lotus feels like the one, but also now's not the moment
Absolutely,
because so
the timing would be a little uncomfortable. Yeah,
if there was a betting market that was taking wagers on whether or not Jeweled Lotus is legal by the end of 2026, I would make money putting a wager down that it will be legal by the end of 2026.
Of the 3 that were unbanned, I think the least amount of harm comes with Jeweled Lotus. I would say
of the 3, yes.
Of the 3, yeah. Not that there wouldn't be some amount. I said the least amount of harm.
Yeah. I don't need to see Dockside again. I'm fine with it where it's at, because it did sort of always feel like, now that we have the bracket system as a means of having these types of conversations, it did kind of always feel like it didn't do bracket 3 things, it did bracket 4 things is kind of like always the vibe for it. And
they may not have been banned in the first place if the bracket system already existed too. So there's that argument too. I don't know how much I buy it, because they still are doing unhealthy things. Like I said, it's more of the 3, there's a least egregious one, and Jeweled Lotus probably is that.
I think that there are ways that Jeweled Lotus can make a game fun. I feel less that way. I feel like there are fewer ways that a Mana Crypt and a Dockside makes games fun compared. But also, I still don't need to see them. And it was very funny timing, because I have that Commander deck. Every card has to say the word Commander on it, and I had just gotten a Jeweled Lotus. And then, I don't know, a month later or whatever, or within the same month, it gets the ban, and I'm like, oh, well, okay. But also, like, yeah, the moments that I played it did supercharge some stuff, so...
and this might be a perception thing. The thing about fast mana that I always perceive, rightly or wrongly, is if I'm like other game changers in the list, I feel like if I'm in an environment with game changers or something, I'm playing some and you're playing some, and we're going to hit those at different points in games, and maybe mine will be more advantageous here and yours will be more advantageous there, whatever. If I'm playing a game where there's fast mana, if I don't have fast mana, there's a good chance I'm screwed.
Yeah.
Or like the impact on how that makes lopsided bad games is different than other categories of game changer cards. But I don't know how you would quantify that. That might be an erroneous perception on my part for whatever reason. So like I'm just relaying the feeling I get when I see it. And like Jeweled Lotus is one of those cards where like I feel like it and Crypt and Dockside felt like they made for one-sided, lopsided games in a way that is mega busted as Ristic Study might possibly be, didn't.
Yeah, yeah. I'm happy to see, again, kind of echoing something that we had mentioned at the top here. They also are giving us an extra level of transparency here. No other changes for the rest of the year. Like,
yeah,
they're already committing to that in April, barring any Nadus that come in and explode something.
Well, he said no bans, unbans. Did I felt like they specifically avoided saying no changes to game changes, but I could be misremembering that.
You're absolutely correct. Yeah. No changes to the banned list specifically for the rest of the year.
Okay.
But like,
so we could conceivably get a game changer change at some point.
Yeah, yeah. But I again appreciate that, like, this is a level of transparency that I don't think that we I want to make sure we don't take it for granted, is kind of the thing, because there are a lot of other games that don't get this type of clarity, and they are offering that. So that's just that is an extra cherry on top of, like, all right, cool move, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, and I see folks in chat too kind of talking about, is Dark Ritual too powerful? Dark Ritual is specific to black only, whereas the ubiquity of Jeweled Lotus, it's going to show up in every deck no matter what color it is. It's going to fix things. I see where Dark Ritual is the immediate analogy. Also, a free Dark Ritual is a very big difference.
A recurrable Dark Ritual.
Recurrable Dark Ritual. There's a lot of specific things. Not to say that Dark Ritual is not recurable, because it is, but so much easier to do all those things with Jeweled Lotus in so many more decks. It's kind of, like, there's one thing that's very, very powerful in mono black decks, but then you compare that to Golos, and it shows up everywhere, or just is able to show up everywhere. So I think very different conversation.
Dark Ritual is crazy powerful in a deck that's built around doing crazy powerful fast things that utilize Dark Ritual to its advantage. And those decks tend to kind of segregate themselves to a very particular end of the power pool. If a casual person is running Dark Ritual in their, bracket 2 deck, it's probably generally a bad card in that deck. Not always, but like really, really often it's going to be underwhelming and actually will hurt them, because their deck isn't built around, ad nauseum a little bit is the same way, because their deck isn't built around taking advantage of it.
Right.
Much more impactful, weirdly enough, and I don't think it should be a game changer, but like at lower levels, Mana Geyser is straight up a crazy card.
Yep.
I don't know if you should put it on the game changer list, but like if you're playing in a bracket 2 or bracket 3, that Mana Geyser is oftentimes generating you like 15 plus mana, and absolutely, and doesn't require you to have specifically built your deck to take advantage of it. It's just accidentally fantastic. I don't think that should be a game changer either necessarily. But I just wanted to compare
I like you pointing it out
things.
though. Like, I think that's a strong one to point out. I think that one and it's either Treacherous or Treasonous Ogre were two that were read to expand its game changer presence. Those particular, like, not just like extra mana, but like supercharge dose of mana, those are the ones that were like kind of close to the conversation to me. But I also agree with you that, like, but we didn't need it. Like, compared to some of the other things that could occupy the, because every card that you add is an opportunity cost, and there were other things that were on my mind, like a mana drain, which didn't even make the cut because there are other cards that you have to address sometimes. Right. So
it's so easy just to say, like, well, this card's powerful, it should be a game changer. Well, everybody's trying to do powerful things, and so it's just finding out what is truly egregious versus what is powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
What creates unfavorable board states, unfavorable situations where it's either incredibly lopsided and everything. Because we've talked about powerful cards. It's the whole point of why people play Commander, anyways, because they want to do big, powerful things and kind of do that. And so finding out having to separate what is actually egregious and widespread versus just powerful in general. It's not an envious job for the CFP. Like, I would love to just be a fly on the wall for a lot of those conversations, especially when Gavin gets involved. Because the few times I've gotten to talk philosophy of Magic in general, not just Commander, with Gavin, it's been so enlightening. I would love to hear those conversations, because it's hard. It's super easy to say one specific card, but you can't evaluate one specific card always in a vacuum when we're talking about stuff like ban lists, game changers, stuff, all those conversations.
Yeah. Real quick, I'm seeing Rob the Princess there mention Jeska's Will, that they would remove it from Game Changer status. And interestingly, that is actually not one that was named in the article as a card that they considered. So it seems like we can take that as a sign that the folks in the Commander Format panel and Gavin feel pretty strongly that Jeska's Will deserves to stay there. I feel like maybe we had mentioned it as a question mark in our heads in a previous episode, but I can't recall exactly. I'll say for me that like it feels to me at least like one of those cards that I would put a question mark near. I don't think I'm bothered by it, but maybe it is a card that I guess I would have appreciated maybe more clarity now that that's been brought up. So I appreciate you bringing it up in chat. Do you guys have a feeling on Jeska's Will, like it should stay solidly where it is, or?
I don't think it's moving.
Red's kind of in the same boat White is to a degree, where like the drop off between losing Jeska's Will and the next really good draw effect is pretty huge. However, I feel like the ceiling on Jeska's Will is higher than what Trouble in Pairs is. So
the mana generation is a little
weird. It felt bad losing them both, but I feel like you add Trouble in Pairs back in and it doesn't jack your deck's power level up to the level it does when you draw a Jeska's Will.
Yeah, and actually, you bring up a great point that like it does also require your commander to be out, but like the benefits that you get are crazy. So like it requires setup, but it also does. I've seen ones that whiff, but I've also seen ones that like do supercharge a game. So it's more of a coin flip for me sometimes. But I've also that's just the type that I play, and I know that people abuse it way more than I do. So
I think Jeska's Will might be underrated. I honestly think it might be underappreciated.
Yeah, there are definitely times that Jeska's Will can whiff, but yeah, we talk about the far extremes, but the median of where Jeska's Will like most likely is going to be is still very, very good.
Cool. Yeah.
And another thing too, I think is probably worth noting: Trouble in Pairs. It's how good Trouble in Pairs is has nothing to do with you as a brewer or player. It's just a good card, and you play it, and the chips fall where they may. Jeska's Will is very dependent on how good of a player you are, and how, not dependent, but like it scales upwards with how good of a player you are and how good of a brewer you are. Like that changes a lot with that card in a way that Trouble in Pairs doesn't. Is that something they even consider or talk about? I don't know, but it's worth noting, I think.
I don't know. I think it more boils down to are you a good enough player to cast it when your commander's out or not?
That definitely makes a difference for sure. But there's times when like it's a good play when your commander isn't out too, and like there's a lot more decisions you're making. I think that than you are with Trouble in Pairs.
Maybe the point is like that you're trying to make is, or at least like that I would take away from it is learning when to time it and making sure that your opponents don't have 3 cards in hand versus 7.
Well, in the opposite could be said too. You can say, well, Jeska's Will requires you to be a smart brewer and player to take the maximum advantage of it, whereas Trouble in Pairs is just doesn't care and just gets you advantage regardless. So like you can use that as an opposite argument too, I suppose.
Yeah, I also like what Commander Viral there is mentioning. The ceiling for Jeska's Will is also infinite copy combos. And
sure, right, yeah,
and
that's true.
To that point, one of the cards that I had stated in past episodes that I had my eye on are cards that could accidentally trip and stumble into a combo really, really easily. Hence the addition of Food Chain on there. And Phyrexian Altar being one that I had on my list as well, because that card can just be used in a decently honest way, and also it can. I say decently honest. What I would register as a bracket 3 type of way. I don't think it does bracket 2 things, but also it could just like combo out on the game, and sometimes that happens without you even realizing that it was there, and then it enabled you to do a thing that you're like, oh wait a second. And Jeska's Will does also seem to have that vibe. So having this conversation provides clarity for it. So like I'm again happy with it staying there. I think if there's any card that they didn't discuss that I would have like maybe appreciated more clarity, Jeska's Will is the only thing that I can put there, and even then I'm happy with the other bits of clarity that we got that didn't even Jeska's Will didn't even occur to me until I saw someone mention it in chat. So it's just kind of interesting there. Oh, and I also appreciate here the data that he mentions up at the top of the article too. I mean, EDA Trek, we love the data, right? But they did a survey at MagicCon Chicago. It's all right, did you say? Challenge the stats.
I watched down in the dungeon. I think on Sunday, Gavin was walking from table to table to table, like asking about the bracket, and like had even I think a little notebook out and was like taking notes and keeping track of it. So yeah, when he was talking about, like, he was walking around actually like watching people use the bracket and have a pregame conversation, that kind of thing.
I love that you called it the dungeon, that area in MagicCon Chicago.
It was miserable.
It's really, the Matrix lighting, the fact that it was 48 billion degrees.
Yeah, the liminal space dungeon down
yeah,
there,
lower level. So wild.
Part of me wasn't too concerned when I only got to play, I think it was 4 games in Chicago, because the space where you had to be to play games was just miserable.
Yeah,
there's an SCG Con has an event first weekend of May in Minneapolis, and I intentionally didn't sign up as a content creator because I'm like, I'm just gonna pay my $80 and go and play games all weekend and have no responsibilities and like have committed to nothing. I'm just gonna go play games, not worry about being a professional.
Jonathan Marshall in there. Gavin personally asking people is not good scientific data collection. You're 100% right. That isn't the only data that they collected.
It was not.
They sent out like an actual survey afterwards to everybody who attended Chicago, had their email on file. Like, they did proper data collection. That wasn't the only point, but still,
but it is useful to observe and like be out there just seeing how it's working for people, for sure.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said for somebody going out there, especially somebody in Gavin's position, to go out and talk to regular players who aren't content creators, because there's always that bias in there, who aren't paid to be there, who aren't Wizards employees, because they have a lot of good minds, but there's still bias in there. Same like we talk about bias on EDH Rec, bias on the data. Mm-hmm. So going out there and just talking to random players, a lot of players who may not even realize who he is. He just, hey, I'm doing a survey about MagicCon Chicago, and like that's it. Like there's still a lot of value in that, and just like being on that level and having those conversations. Not to say like, you're right, it's not perfect data, but like they did proper data collection as well.
Yeah. I like that Chuck Norris for president. Old joke, but a thing here that I think is kind of a good final note too is the bracket system has solved a lot of our Rule Zero discussions. That right there is also data that we like seeing. Is just like the testament from people, and I think it's important for us to register as well that it isn't just about. I think we sometimes, the three of us, fall into a trap of stating that these can be like really helpful for games with people you don't know. But the fact that a bunch of cards were just unbanned also kind of means like I want to make sure I have these conversations with people I do know too, because there's a lot more that could shift, and with more of these cards being named as game changers, there are these conversations that I want to have with the play group as well, which I think will be helpful too, because just because you have a dedicated play group doesn't always mean that you feel like 100% of the games that you get to play with them feel fantastic. And so having more stuff unlocked here and more cards being affected by things like bans and unbans or being added to the game changer list, that feels to me like a very centering experience, not just for people that I play with at a game store, but also that I can have more to discuss with people that I do regularly play with. And so I'm just happy to see someone say stuff like that. Like it is helping a lot of Rule Zero discussions. And I think that can be true for the stuff that we commonly say about like people that we don't know. And I think that will also start to be true even with games with people that we do know. Mm-hmm. And that's something I feel happy about.
I've made this point about it before, but I'll make it again. If the bracket system accomplished nothing other than this, what I'm about to say, I think it's a success. A year ago, when I sat down with some strangers and one person's like, "Oh, my deck's a 7." I really don't know what that means. Okay, I know it's not a CEDH deck, and I know it's not like an unmodified precom, but that's it, right? Like that was a really vague way to describe your deck. If I go somewhere and sit down and someone says this is a bracket 2 deck, I know it doesn't have game changers in it. I know it doesn't have mass land destruction. I know it doesn't have probably extra turns. I know it has minimal tutors. Mm-hmm. It doesn't tell me everything, but it tells me quite a bit.
Yeah,
and it tells me way more than 7. If you tell me what a 3 is, I can. There's a lot of specifics. I know what that means. If you tell me what it's a 4, there's a lot of specifics. I know what that means, in a way that we never had before. And to me, that's very, very successful because it gives me a real general idea of what we're looking at in a way that we never had before. That doesn't mean it can't be improved on or refined further, but like I think that to me makes it a success.
Yeah, I would say almost like. Probably the my deck is a 7, 1 through 10 system kind of give you like a direction that you were being
Sure.
pointed at when you launched a ship out into outer space or whatever. But
Right.
this feels a little bit more like these new bits of language feel like you've got some of those like bowling bumper guardrails up, even though it's like still pretty wide. It doesn't feel like too constrictive to me, at least. But it feels better than the kind of the like I'll throw it out into the ether. There's much more abstraction there. Whereas even having a small number of limiters or walls that you can hit, it feels nice to. I don't know. I guess it kind of falls into the same line of thinking as the restriction breed creativity thing, right? There are ways that having those specific identifiers can actually make the process better for you. So,
Yep.
Anyway, I don't know that I have a lot else in terms of my first impressions here to announce. I don't know how you guys feel. I want to make sure that
I think this was first, second, and seventh impressions. We've been here for almost 2 hours, and we want to
true.
thank everybody here for
Yes.
bearing with us. It seems like a lot of people liked this format, doing a little live stream after the announcements.
Yeah. I'm
Please
so
let us
happy
know
with
in
the folks that
comment.
showed up. It's so cool.
Yeah, thank you to everyone for doing this.
And
Well, for
and
showing up,
given
yeah.
the amount of people that showed up to watch it, we will probably be, I would imagine, doing this kind of thing again in the future.
This was a much bigger success than I thought it would be. Like, look how
Yeah.
active folks have been. Like, how many folks are like, that's really cool. Thanks for showing up. I know it's a lot of big news. I think generally I'm looking over my impressions here. What I'm not seeing is a lot of confusion from people. What I'm seeing is, I don't know. I think people seem to really be grokking it, and so I'm happy to see the adoption of the system feels like it's well on its way compared to evidence that it's starting to starting to fall down. And that again just strikes me as heartening. I'm glad to see that type of tone in the room. So
For sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think I've said all that I have to say. I hope that you guys have the space for it too. So stop me if you want to, for sure.
Well, Joey, give us the typical outro so everybody at least gets to feel like this was a real episode.
Oh, we didn't even give them any dad jokes, Matt. What's wrong with that?
I worked a few in, don't worry, you just missed them.
All right, yeah, cool. Yeah, typical outro then. I guess we're just going to say thank you everyone so much for joining us. You know where to find us on socials. We'll have a podcast out probably discussing this very, very topic here on Friday with even more thoughts and hopefully more data or reactions about it and the ways that it has been received by the community too. But this was a really nice way to, all right, take a breath, see what's going on. This felt really productive, so I'm happy and looking forward to the future. I feel optimistic about where Magic is going with Commander. So
Very much so.
Same.
all right.
Same these.
With that, cheers everybody. Thank you again so much for
All right,
tuning
y'all.
in. And
Peace
as
out,
always,
everybody. Thanks for stopping by.
remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck. Take
There it
care,
is.
everyone. There it is. And let me find a button.
We got to find a button now. Oh, it's a new button.
I gotta find the end stream button.
The end stream button. Oh, everybody's getting bonus content now.
This is the after hours.
This is like extra innings in baseball.
Right.
You didn't expect it, but you still get it. It's always a pleasure.
Cool. Stream has ended. It was on a slight delay, so I